everyone here.
So much nonsense. Thank you, Dan, for that beautiful introduction. It's such an honour to be here with Roaring Stories at the fabulous Royal Oak. Now, what a ridiculous honour and pleasure to be here with you, none other than Kate Mildenhall, one of the country's best loved creatives. And, you know, being here tonight means an awful lot, especially to me, because it was your podcast that I listened to when I was first starting out, when I was literally sending out my debut manuscript for the first time to agents. It was your voice that guided me through the anxieties and the fears and answered all my questions about, you know, about the industry and how it all works and everything. And it's kind of phenomenal to me to look back on that, you know, now that we are such good friends, and know that you didn't know what you were doing for me.
I don't know that I knew what I was doing, full stop.
No, fair enough. But you know, that podcast and what you do with Catherine is such a source of wisdom and comfort and humour. It certainly was for me, and I'm sure it was and continues to be for many of you sitting here today. It's such an important kind of community pillar, I think, and a safe hub for us as well. It's a nice little home for us. And when we're feeling rubbish, we can always go back to it. So Kate and I first met at a live recording of the podcast at Glee Books, and following that, you know, despite many lockdowns and what felt like a century of postponed meetups and hangs and, you know, constant texts going, we're finally going to get to drink cocktails and go dancing, and we just never did. Well, we did at some point, but we, you know, despite all of that, we became really close friends. And as a friend of Kate's, I can tell you that she is one of, if not the most generous, fun, and vivacious writers/humans you will ever meet. You will never regret a second in her company, although you may find yourself travelling at speed on a trolley through deserted hotel corridors.
It's true.
And or hear yourself a little bit laughing. I speak from experience. Watch out for this woman. She's wild. She is also deeply intelligent, wildly talented, wise beyond belief, kind, and completely obsessed with all things creativity. And in fact, you know, another warning, if you ever find yourself in a bar with her and you get her started on creative processes, you will not leave for a very long time. In fact, heads up, we may not leave this building ever again. Anyway, now look, I am a huge fan of your work, and I could talk at length about each one of your books. With the Hummingbird Effect, when I first started trying, you know, sitting down to think about how I was going to have this conversation with you, as someone that has a lot of conversations with writers about their work, I tend to have a little bit of a framework within which I kind of structure my conversations. And I realised that with this book, I had to throw that out of the window. Because this book is so extraordinary and it's really, really different. And it's kind of unlike any book I've read before. I mean, as Dan said, it does share DNA with David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. It shares DNA with Jennifer Egan's Candy House and Maggie Shipstead's Full Circle. But it is also, you know, it's just got Kate's special sauce. And it makes it something...
Kate's special sauce, Anna, remember that. Use that.
Put it on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
So look, I don't know how you're going with your pitch.
Terribly.
I'm not going to make you do it. But is there any way, can you sort of summarise what the book is about as far as your heart knows what it's about right now?
That's a really good question. I had so many things that I was going to interject and say, but I'm going to go with that question because I need to keep my train of thought. What I think the book is about for me is generations of women and how they are connected, and how they are sisters, mothers and daughters, lovers and kin. And I think what I was most interested in, and I'll, by way of explaining this, I'll tell you a story that my very beloved grandmother, who we lost last year, grew up in a household of women. She had 3 sisters, and when she was 18 months old, for anyone who knows Melbourne and Northcote in particular, her dad was killed in a tram accident on Ruckers Hill. And immediately her mother's sister came in and moved into the house. So they were a household of 5 women, and they stayed that way until all of the daughters moved out. And then by the time my mum was born, the aunt moved back in again. So it was just this kind of revolving households of women looking after each other in different ways. And I was really interested in that idea. And so that's kind of the connective thread that goes from 1933 in a meatworks, and Peggy and Lil, who are 2 women who live in the same house. Lil needs a renter. Peggy's a young woman who's just moved to the meatworks. Through 2020, and Hilda, who's 86 years old and living in aged care as lockdown hits. Further into Footscray, and a young couple, Laura and Kat. La's a singer. Her voice is broken, and she starts working in the Want warehouse, which is my take on an Amazon warehouse, and then further into 2184, where these 2 sisters are trying to navigate their new world. So it's kind of like a wild, ridiculous, exploded kind of a book, but I feel like the heart of it is those women and how they look after each other.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the reasons, as you said, that it is so unique is it has this very distinct form and structure, and I think an exploded novel is exactly the right way to describe it. If you've read Cloud Atlas, it doesn't go in the same palindrome form as that, but it's the same sort of thing where you have different stories across different timelines, and the kind of key to the book is to kind of find the thread that connects them all, as you said. But on top of all of that, we've got this massive cast of characters. We've got this enormously vivid and diverse bunch of settings. We've got, it time hops, and there's a drawing in the middle. And then we'll come back to that. So it is a story. It absolutely is a story. But it also, for me, it feels like a museum exhibition. It feels like a gallery. And it feels like something that you can walk around and, in your mind and look at as well. It feels those pieces of it, they don't feel fractured. It's not exploded in a chaotic, crazy way, but it feels like an exhibition, and it feels like a curated projection of ideas rather than a kind of like you were saying the other day about the hot take. It's not like you're being, I'm trying to think of the word. You're not teaching any lessons. You're not being didactic. You're projecting a bunch of feelings and ideas and offering them up for the reader to consider. But this book did not begin like that.
It didn't.
It began somewhere really, really different. And I think in order to showcase, the best parts of this book, we need to go back to the beginning. You need to tell us where it began, and kind of let's kind of go on that journey of how it became what it is.
So the book began as mine do. I only have one idea at a time. I know there's many writers in this audience. I don't know how you do it. I only have one idea at a time. But I always know when the previous book, in my vast experience of 3, is getting to the end, because I get a new idea. And so for this one, a lot of my family grew up in Footscray in the west of Melbourne. And we were at a party one night, and my uncle for a time was mayor of Footscray as well. His claim to fame is that he met Princess Di while he was in that role. And as we do, we're chatting away, and he told me about the night they lived close to the old Angus meatworks, and after it was already dilapidated and was out of use, it caught fire. And because there was 100 years of sawdust and fat in the wooden floors, it just went up. And they had to, my aunt at the time was pregnant, and they had to move out of they had to move away because of the fumes. And I'm sure there's writers here who will know that feeling of knowing that an image has really caught you, and that image of the abattoir going up in flames caught me. And I came home and I wrote it in a new document, like, the abattoir on fire, 2 women, one of them's hard and the other one's soft. I think that's what the line said. And I really wanted, after the Mother Fault, which was kind of, so wild and speculative, so much fun to write, but hard work doing the world building and using my imagination instead of just following history, that I was like, I'm just going to write straight up historical fiction. It's going to be simple, I said. It's going to take 1 year. I'm just going to write a simple historical fiction. And there were such great archives. So there were these oral history archives of the meat workers talking about their experiences there. Some of them were still alive. I got to interview them. There was so much stuff. State Library had stuff. There were images. And that was all going great. And then I realised that the year that I wanted to write about, 1933, was the year that the chain system came into Australia. So the chain is the system of slaughter, came from Chicago, where instead of one slaughterman being in charge of one beast, they were the gods. The slaughtermen were known as the gods of the abattoir. They brought in the chain, which is still what is in place today, where, as the interview so beautifully put it, it's just one man, one cut. And so you do one cut and then the chain moves it along. And the response of the slaughtermen at the time in 1933 was to strike against this. They were unsupported by the union. And part of what they said was, we will not cut where another man has cut. There's a whole other book to write on that as well. But I was so obsessed with this idea, and where the women were, and the extraordinary kind of sense of community around Footscray and around the meatworks. But what happened is that I was writing this into COVID, and suddenly I've got my Google alert on that's got everything that's coming up about workers' rights and meatworks and the meat union, and I'm suddenly getting flooded by these news articles coming from all around the world about meat workers who are getting sick from COVID, who have to keep turning up to work when all other industries are shutting down because people still want to eat meat. And I was like, I can't contain this. This story will not be held by 1 year in 1933 because I cannot do it justice. And as I started to think about what those workers were doing, we're also looking at these aged care workers who, and slightly different in Melbourne, I'm sure, but very much the same here, who were getting abused in the press for spreading COVID because they were doing 3 shifts, because there was no one else to fill the shifts. And it all kind of coalesced, and I realised that the book had exploded its own bounds. And even though I didn't want to, I really didn't, because it's a bloody hard book to pitch. Like, I'm actually doing this kind of historical speculative thing with a diagram in the middle, and it's half written in WhatsApp. Like, my publisher wasn't gunning for it. But sometimes, and dear Charlotte Wood, who is here and such a fabulous mentor, the book will tell you what it's meant to be. And this book said, I'm sorry, you're not getting away with 1933.
But let's backtrack a bit, because at what point did you write that historical fiction book?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so you got to the end.
I got to the end. I handed it in. I got to the end, I handed it in.
And you handed that book in, and what did your publisher say?
My publisher, my dear publisher, Fiona Henderson, who's not currently the publisher because she left Simon & Schuster, who was wonderful, she said, one of the things she said was, you've tried to fit in every single thing you care about into the one book.
Yeah.
At the time, and which was a criticism at the time, like, it's too big. And while I was looking...
And that was the simple historical book.
That was the simple historical book.
I think it's really worth mentioning.
And after, when I was licking my wounds, and then we went back into lockdown, it's a whole story, but I was like, I think I have tried to write a book.
So then you said, you know what I'm going to do about that? Is I'm going to put in future timelines and
Yeah.
traveling and
Yeah.
AI bots and
Yeah.
I'm going to
All of
put
it.
Amazon warehouses and okay.
all of it.
Yeah.
And one of the
Smart.
things that happened that was really quite profound is that I received a beautiful, through RMIT, a beautiful residency. And I work really well on retreat. I do binge writing. I've got 2 kids and I tend to do much better when I'm away from the house. And I'd gone down to the beautiful McCraith house, the butterfly house it's known as, in Dramana. And I was pushing back against this idea that I was going to write this new thing. And I went down for a swim every morning, and there was this older gentleman who I saw who had a kind of a banged up sports car. He was interesting in lots of ways. And he was doing something on the beach every day. I walked past him 3 days before the 4th day. I was like, I'm going to ask this guy what he's doing, because otherwise I'm going to be annoyed with myself. And he was drawing patterns on the sand, and he drew them every day, and he just said, until I'm finished. And there were these intricate kind of geometric patterns. And we chatted for a while. He was Irish. And at one point he said, you look like you're a creative person. What are you doing? And I said, actually, I'm writing a book and I've just broken it. Like I have no idea how to put it back together. And he stepped away from what he was drawing and he put his stick in the sand and he said, it's simple. You start here and he drew 1 line down, and then you do this, and he drew another line across, and he drew a 6-pointed star. And he said, you just follow the lines. So I went off for my swim thinking, that was nice. And I went back to the little house and I drew the shape down. And I was like, all right, yeah. And then I, madly did my Post-it notes and kind of moved it around. And it was literally, it sounds very wanky, but it was literally like a compass. It was like he had said, you can have a book that has all of these different things in it, and you'll trust your reader that they will make sense of it, that you will find a map through it.
Which is amazing, because I always think that, and what we put out there it's only one part of the conversation, and it is a 2-way street. It's something that is offered by you but completed by the mind of the person into into where it goes. So that is extraordinary. What kind of did you feel a bit when you went back? A bit like, oh my god,
a bit spooky.
Weird as just happened.
But also, so I deeply believe part of the PhD that I tried to pitch at one point was that I was doing my PhD on serendipity. But I do very much believe in the serendipitous nature of, that feeling for the writers in here when you start an idea and then you feel like that idea is a magnet, and everything, the newspaper articles start, the song comes on, people start having conversations with you about your subject matter, and that trusting that nature of it. Charlotte, I think you write about this. I'm probably just stealing your words.
Heat seeking.
Heat seeking is how Charlotte calls it, what Charlotte calls it. And so I think that's so important. And I think that as I was jumping between these women, I also remember hearing David Mitchell years and years ago speak about how he put Cloud Atlas together. And he said he wrote it completely separately, and then he put wormholes between each section. So I wasn't that stressed about how I could make the thing work. I was like, follow these characters through. I wrote them all separately in kind of separate documents. Follow them through and trust that the matter is there, that the connections are there.
Oh my god, that's extraordinary.
Makes me sound way smarter than I am. Also, it was just a shit fight for 4 years. So
how many times did you cry?
Many times.
All right, look. Because we're talking about these separate parts and the wormholes, I won't go over them because you've already kind of sketched them out really nicely. What you didn't mention, I don't think, is that you also have an additional voice, which is this. It's like a bookend voice. And it sort of acts as like a chorus. It's the voice of the river.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to get you to read out a really short part from. Can you? Sorry, it's the bit at the beginning with the. You know the bit at the beginning that you wrote.
Yeah.
You know that. Yeah. So, and the reason I want Kate to read this is because I feel like each section is so distinctive, and as a bookend piece. It kind of sets the tone, as all good prologues should. but it is also a kind of a voice that does not return again through the book until the end. Read away.
It's called Before Now Next, and Lizzie King, who's one of my extraordinary editors, will be able to pick up every single tiny word that has been changed. There's maybe 3 of them since.
Oh yeah, sorry,
it's the
anniversary.
Below the surface, through the rippled, roiling waters of us, down, deep down, silver scales flash against a piece of buckled tin tossed in, an old engine grown slick with river muck and weed, and here, what's this? Snouting forward in the murky dark, a bundle of rags attracting the bottom dwellers, glide on past before it reveals its innards. Hidey places, deep water places, rock and mud and quiet, secret hush places, river mutter, water whisper, babble, gurgle, seep. Listen, shh, for what we know is back, and it is forward, memory and dream. Glide on, glide back, these rag things, a babe come too early, maybe. A mother who knows the river will swallow her secret whole.
I loved it. I love it. And it is very, very kind of, immediately when I read that, I was like, I was taken straight back to Cloud Street and that beautiful kind of fishland language.
Cloud Street I had the great privilege of interviewing Tim this year. It was on our list for so long. I was like, how the hell do I get Tim Wyndon to agree to an interview? And finally he did. But it's extraordinary. I reckon Cloud Street came out maybe when I was in year 10. I studied it in year 11. And at different times it's been unfashionable to like that book, as these things happen. But it is quite extraordinary.
It is.
And also how profound the influence has been on my writing. And sometimes you can't see those things until much, much later.
And then you return to it as an adult.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, that's where I got it from. I have that with like 80s movies sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's where I say that. Or that's where I did that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, so let's move on. You've spoken quite a bit about the 1933 sections, which, personally for me, they're so visceral and real and so absorbing and compelling. I just loved them. I loved all of the bits. But in 2020, we've got Hilda, and we see such a lot of this character through different angles. And in fact, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that through the book, we see her at almost all of her stages of life in different pieces. Now, 2020 is written in a quite a fragmented way. So 1933 is, as you said, written in quite a kind of traditional narrative way. 2020 is WhatsApp messages, it's incident reports, it's stream of consciousness. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to write that in that way.
Well, firstly, I think that's how so many of us experienced 2020 and 2021. Like, there are sections where I'm trying to kind of summarise COVID, partly because I was like, this is going to be deeply triggering for people, and so I don't want them to have to spend too long on the page thinking about what we went through. So I kind of did them as little prose poems, and I basically went back delved through my own WhatsApp messages with my girl gangs and family gangs, and also asked them, like, what are the phrases that stand out for you? What are the phrases that you remember? And then went through a whole lot of headlines. So that's how I kind of put those together. And as kind of hard as they were to write, they were also fun, because I was like, this was madness. This was utter madness. And also now it's so hard to remember what that feeling was like. I also, I talked about my grandmother before. She was sick. We got to nurse her at home. We were very privileged to be able to do so until she died. But our greatest fear was that she would end up in hospital, and that, not that she wouldn't get good care. We've got a lot of health workers in our family. We knew she'd get good care, but that we wouldn't be able to see her. And some of those WhatsApp, the WhatsApp messages, like for all of you, I imagine, and for people who are doing caring work now, they are schedules, they are appointments, that has someone picked up has someone got the medication, it's just like this constant caring schedule. And then very luckily for me, and Sam Colley is in the audience up the back there, I got to hang out with Sam in New Zealand when I had already written a lot of that section. And Sam just happened over the course of dinner to tell me that he'd been working in aged care during that period, and I said, oh, will you read this section for me to also make sure that I got things right.
Yeah.
You know, that I wanted to think about where I live, way out in the kind of towards the hills in Melbourne, and there's a little aged care residence that I sometimes walk past. But every morning I would see women who'd obviously caught the train. We live, unfortunately for us, in the whitest part of Melbourne. And these women were not from Nillumbik, from the area that I live in. I knew that they had travelled a very long way to come and be aged care workers in this residence. And I knew that they were going on to other shifts and to third shifts. And I was like, what? What are we doing? What is this? What is happening here? So that's how Hilda's kind of story came together.
Yeah.
And I was also just really conscious of giving her also a full life. She's a scientist. I wanted to, have her, well, what would you be remembering? I'm not sure. Would you remember your best sex? Would you remember the best meal? And those were the kinds of memories that I was trying to put in and play with.
I loved her. There's a very particular point where she's talking about some of her science work and, talking about her reaction to her research into moths and how, the extinction of said species was such a... I don't want to ruin it. It's a beautiful passage. And also the rage that is in some of those incident reports about healthcare and the system and the way that people are treated. That one where she kind of drafts an incident report and then deletes it and then writes the actual one.
Yeah.
So good. It also resonated with me massively because we lost my granddad in 2020 and it was just all of that was so beautifully handled, I think. Moving on to 2031.
Yes.
Kat and La, when you said about the process of being immersed in the meatworks research and then finding all of this stuff coming up on your feed with these meat workers in 2020, experiencing all this stuff, that to me feels like the genesis of Kat and La, because it's so cyclical. What those sections to me are doing is going, nothing has changed. And we're going through the same stuff. It just looks different. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that really struck me that was so incredible is this slow push, some of the strike work that was happening in Amazon warehouses, which was, so hard. So hard to get going, and yet you could see it, these little kind of flickering fires of it. And my parents are teachers. I grew up, I was first a teacher before I took on this strange gig as a writer. And we grew up going to strike marches, and we knew the language of scabs and that you didn't cross picket lines before I think we knew, all the different language that you could have. And it really struck me as interesting that there was these kinds of flickers of that coming back at this time, where unions have been so suppressed for so long through our industrial relations. Also, Amazon, right? Warehouses, like they are, I don't know why more books aren't written in them. They're the craziest places. There's a whole section in the book of things that you can buy. Like there's a bacon general section of 30 items. They are all real things from Amazon. You can get bacon flavoured knickers. I didn't know this, but you can. They're a thing on Amazon. So like that kind of stuff.
Just gonna order me.
Yeah, I know, right? That stuff was bizarre to me. There is also, I know, in the audience, Stephanie Sneed, who's an extraordinary translator. And one of the books that I read, which Stephanie worked on, was Joseph Pontou's On the Line, this extraordinary French novel in verse about the experience of working in factories. And so all of this kind of stuff was just coalescing in my mind, like this is the moment to write all that down. And Lara and Kat were just a joy to write, can I also say, because no one from RMIT is here. I really enjoyed playing with the academics in that one too. And I probably put some lines in that I should have taken out in copy edit, but they stayed in.
I love that.
Lizzie did check them, but she knows that I went pretty close to the bone.
And I feel like what we're talking about is it's very heavy on the thematics, but and I don't want to give the impression that this book is it's not as kind of I mean, it's incredibly clever, but it's not as kind of cerebral as we might be making it out to be. Like, these characters are so fully rounded, they're so 3D, they're so well drawn, and Kat and La particularly, they jump right off the page. And their relationship is so alive and vibrant, thanks particularly to the very good sex scenes that you put in there.
I got the most gorgeous text message yesterday from someone. I haven't listened to the audiobook yet, but someone was listening on their way home, and they're on Springvale Road, which if you know Victoria, if you know Melbourne, it's a very long road, it's fairly boring, and they just sent a message saying, "Up to Lara and Kat, Springvale Road will never be the same again."
Yeah.
I was like, tick, I've done something right there.
And just as a side note, as somebody who has narrated audiobooks and has had to narrate sex scenes, it's so awkward because, it's just you and your engineer. In fact, I think I've recorded the same one that you might have done your audiobook at. Audio Brian, did you do? Yeah. So funny because you're actually in quite close proximity to them, and you've got your headphones on, and, they're very much in your ear. And you're very much in theirs. And I was doing this like full-on sex scene and I had to stop, and I was like, Brad, things are going to get wild. We're just going to have to push through this. It's going to be super awkward. Anyway, enough of that. I love that. Now, moving on again to 2081, we're going to skip on. I just want you to talk really, really quickly, if you can, about, because we don't want to say too much about this section.
No.
But Maz and Onyx, their world is completely different. It's almost unrecognisable. And this is a section about a world unmade, in which we see a rebuilding of language and a rediscovery of all that has come before. And that's very much in that sort of speculative, imaginative thing, that is way beyond the mother fault, really. What was that like to write?
It's really me chucking in middle grade fantasy for my two daughters in the middle of an adult book. Maz and Onyx are basically my two girls, fierce, headstrong, sometimes make good decisions, often make terrible decisions, love each other, want to kill each other. And I wanted to write this pushed forward idea, to get past apocalypse, like, let's not dwell in the collapse. Let's go past that and see what happens next. This big what if. But I started with Maz and Onyx, and then kind of just put them, when I teach younger writers, which I'm sure everyone here has had the experience of doing, those writers here, we talk about that idea of, chuck your characters up a tree and throw rocks at them and see what they do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I did for Maz and Onyx, like, how hard can I make this for them, and see what they'll do in that situation. They're my little bit of hope in a crazy world. And JP, has anyone watched Bad Sisters? So, yeah, exactly. So I had already written JP as my prick, and then I watched Bad Sisters and I was like, oh God, is the prick in that as well? But I kept him in there, and he's part of a cult called The Last Stewards, which I thought I was so clever, and I'd made up this idea that people would want to get rid of all humans, and voluntary extinctionism, it's a thing. Didn't know till I started Googling to fact check for myself, and realised you can get the badge.
Get out!
Yeah, if you sterilise yourself, you can get the badge. Yeah, voluntary extinctionism.
God. Listen, you can tell, can't you? There's so much in this book. We could talk about it forever and ever and ever and ever. I want to talk about that later.
Yeah.
I want to move on just because such a big part of this book is Hummingbird itself.
Yes.
We have to talk about that. And I also just want to say, just quickly, before we move on to Hummingbird, that I felt like the richness of those 1933 scenes, and then steadily as we progress through, and how language is used and how you play with form and style, it's almost like the disintegration of humanity in a way. Was that a deliberate thing that you did? Do you know what I mean? Like,
no, but that sounds very smart, so let's just say.
But I just mean like the fragmented nature
the way that we did language.
It's like PC.
Yeah, the way that we did language.
Experience.
By the end, I really wanted to play with language for Maz and Onyx and mush up words everywhere. And with Lara and Kat, it's very much that kind of work speak, that capitalist kind of, let's do this for this reason. It gives me chills, and I wanted to play with it.
Oh, it gives me chills too. So let's talk about Hummingbird. Hummingbird, okay. Explain for us, as far as you're comfortable in terms of
no spoilers.
What is Hummingbird?
So Hummingbird is an algorithm It's artificial intelligence, a large language learning model, and the way that we are presented with it in the book is that it is a chatbot that someone is speaking to, and it's ultimately been set up to try and solve a problem, which is to uninvent the one innovation from world history to try and make the world a better place. I had so much fun with this. I did use ChatGPT to write part of it.
Stop. We're going to find the bit that you used. Carry on while I find it.
Which, I'd been thinking about AI for a long time. It only became part of the conversation that we're having right now in the last little bit. And so, yes, as part of a provocation, I was trying to use the AI. But I'm really interested in this idea. And partly, I'm not smart enough to do it. I'm not a coder. I'm a wee little novelist, and I want to talk. I'll read this part out, but then I also want to talk about Eva, who's in the front row.
I've got that. So when we read this, we'll
talk about Eva.
Yeah. But also, that was one of the things that blew my mind about this. Is I cannot imagine knowing enough about algorithms and AI to create one of my own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hats off.
Well, that's the position that I was in, and I think crime writers, right? I know there's crime writers in here. I don't get how you do the bit where you're like, I know there has to be a murder and someone has to do it, and then they have to work out how they did it. And the evidence, it blows my mind how you lot do that. So partly, this was my thing of going, I don't know how to do this, so I need to find someone much smarter. So this is part of Hummingbird, and this comes directly from ChatGPT. RSX, can you write me a poem to save the world? Hummingbird, sure, I can give it a go. In this world so vast and wide, our hearts beat with a common stride. We dream of peace and harmony, but war and strife still haunt humanity. The forests, once lush and green, now barren lands, a sight obscene. The oceans teeming with life, choked with trash and endless strife. The air we breathe, once pure and sweet, now thick with smoke and toxic heat. It goes on. Let's plant trees to... RSX, stop. Truly awful. World has moved past rhyming couplets. Let's play to your strengths, huh? Do you think a poem could save the world? And it goes on. And that's how I played with AI, is that I was trying to ask it questions to see how it worked. But the part that I want to talk about, there's a diagram in the book, right? This is a diagram.
It's amazing. You can't see it as clearly, but I know when you go out and buy the book out there, open it to this page and have a look at this diagram.
So I did not create that diagram. Eva Harbridge, Eva, can you just turn around and wave? Eva Harbridge, who's an extraordinary visual designer, created that diagram, and we did so in, was it 3 weeks? I mean, your work took longer than that. I put out to my networks that I didn't know, I didn't have the skills to do this thing that I wanted to do. I had dinner with the gorgeous Carrie Tiffany at one stage, and I said, I think that I want to put a diagram in my book. How do I convince my publisher to do that? And she said, oh, you just tell him that you're doing it. Come up with a diagram first.
Yeah.
And so I was like, right. And so I need to find someone to do this. And then beautifully, I was introduced to Eva and looked at her work and was like, oh my gosh, this person knows speculative fiction, she does amazing stuff. And at the same time, I had this wonderful opportunity to go to Aotearoa, to Devonport, to do a residency there. And I think we started on the first day, just tossing ideas back and forth. You can have a look at some of this stuff on Simon Schuster's website.
Yeah, there's some great content on the website.
But when you get, either it can be a work situation or just a friendship situation, when you are in serious connection buzzland and you're just sparking off each other. That is what we did for 3 weeks straight, until the moment, I did end up putting this up on my Instagram, until the moment that Eva sent so amazing kind of visual concepts. We talked about philosophy and maths and images, and then Eva sent me what she had created, this diagram, and it took so long to upload. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I was sitting there, and I eventually turned my camera on and then just promptly wept, burst into tears. And I think that it was partly because of this idea that so often when we're writing, we have people respond to our words, or the pitch or something like that. They come in with editorial or ideas. And that Eva didn't do that. Eva responded to what I was thinking about and this kind of problem that I had with images, like a different language. And so this idea of what an algorithm is and what it can do and how it uses information, we were kind of doing that as well. And of course, the AIs at the moment can't do what Eva did because she's a living, breathing, amazing human. But it was this extraordinary kind of gift to have that experience in the middle of the process.
I mean, it's phenomenal. With the content that on the SNS website, you can kind of see a little bit of the evolution of that idea, and it's kind of like I'm hearing you talk about it, but I still don't understand how you can say to somebody, "I want a visual representation of an algorithm," particularly when the brief included orbits, lemniscates, infinity symbols, wings, and black holes, and she just goes, "Yeah, yeah, got it, right, done it." Yeah,
everyone needs an Eva, and in fact, one of the things I think is I'm not going to put a diagram in every book, but I would love to do that process every time, because I think that as a creative, it offered me a new way to look at my own work, which might be the same as if someone sang it back to you or danced it back to you. I'm not sure.
But did you have like an image in your head
No.
of what you wanted it to look like?
No, I just had concepts, like I had Bayesian probability or a philosophical adjacent possibility.
Yes,
yeah, all
Draw
of those
me
ideas.
The philosophy of Paul Klee.
Yeah, that's what designers do. It's crazy.
Did you have, why did you want the diagram in the first place then? If you didn't have a kind of projection in your head of what you wanted it to look like, why is it there?
Because a little bit like the COVID, this is a really good question, probably what my publisher asked me many times, but a little bit like the COVID sections, I'd done all this thinking, right? And maybe it's not important to anyone but me. It connects so much of the work together. And I was like, I've got to think about my reader though, right? And I want this to be an invitation, a provocation, an invitation for a reader to look in the circles. There's all these little phrases and words, and you can dive into them if you would like to. You can go and find out what all of those quotes and various things I put in there are. Or you can just go, okay, I'm not here for that.
Yeah.
I'm here for La and Kat, and I want to know if the egg freezing works. And I'm here for Maz and Onyx, and did they find the thing, and did they get away from him? And I'm here for Peg and Lil, and is he such an asshole, or is she really in love with him? And so I like that idea of being able to hit those different experiences for a reader that you might just want to power through, which I sometimes do. Those bits sometimes you get to italics and you skip the italics. I know it's terrible, but sometimes you do. Yeah, exactly. So I kind of was going for trying to please everybody.
I love it. So we're going to throw the floor open for audience questions in just a second. So do get thinking of anything you might want to ask Kate or maybe even Eva. We can pass the mic over to Eva. So I just want to, if she's comfortable. I just want to ask you really quickly while everybody's thinking of their questions. We've talked a little bit about it. You credit quite a fair few writers and books as being inspirations for this book. And anyone that knows you, as I said, does know that you are a kind of you kind of obsessively think about the creative process, and it feels like such a magical thing for you. Maybe, at the risk of setting us both off, can you talk a little bit about that passion, why it's so interesting for you, and also maybe it feeds back into those discussions about AI and how it affects the publishing industry and writers in terms of original thought. And what I'm getting at mainly is, to what extent do you think that we are all, other
Just
people's ideas?
Yeah.
All those other people's ideas are like little sparks that set up a fire in your thing. And to what extent are we all drawing from and refilling the same well?
To all the extent,
Yeah.
I think. And, I said this to someone today. I was doing an interview, and I said the newsletter that I put out is called The Bowerbird for this. And part of the PhD I did was about bowerbirding because of that actual reason. Like, that's how I pick things up. I obsessively read. I look, fill my phone with headlines. It's not my own work. They're not original ideas. I think one of the things that I've learned the further I've gone in, when you think about that kind of you know, maybe the 15-year-old version of you as a writer who knew everything, who only had to do one draft because, like, you had it completely. And I think, you know, as we go further, we unlearn, which is a really good thing to do. One of the books that was so influential for this book was Mina Kelthorpe's The Dye House, which was written, someone correct me, you know, maybe the 40s or the 50s. It's extraordinary. And the language is extraordinary. There's a beautiful new edition by text that Fiona McFarlane does the intro for. And the language is so original and so playful. And I was just blown away by it. And I was like, of course people have been messing with language and being extraordinary, you know, for all of time. And I think that constant reminder, you know, I think there's so many issues with AI which are a separate thing, but absolutely the idea of, you know, reaching in and composting all of that material is how I do my work, and it's why I'm so obsessed with how other people do theirs.
Oh, it's so interesting. I love it. Does anybody have a question for Kate? And, you know, no pressure at all, because I could literally go on forever. Charlotte? Would you like the mic?
No. You can repeat.
Yeah, I'll repeat
Can
it.
you talk about the moment or the day or whatever when you realised it can't be the historical fiction book? You know, when you said the book told you how to write it, was that a slow thing? Was it a moment?
That's a great question. So Charlotte's asking, when did I know that it couldn't just be the historical fiction book? And actually our mutual friend Sarah Santilles, who's an extraordinary writer from the US who runs retreats as well, which I've had the pleasure of doing, she said to me really early on, this isn't just that book, Kate. And I rejected it, you know, and I pushed away from it. And I think that maybe for that reason, there is part of the fact that the book is like, you think you're going to get away with this thing and you're just so not. And that maybe at times you can, you know, shift around that and say, well, this is the time I have, or this is the capacity I have, and I'm just going to do this one. But I did think, and there were lots of reasons, I didn't think I could write Footscrape. I didn't think I had, you know, the capacity to write that place through time. So lots of different solutions presented themselves the further that I sat with it, which I think is maybe one of the things we learn as well.
But what was the moment like when you got that feedback and she said, that's not working?
No, it didn't happen for a while after that.
So what was that process like in terms of, because you probably felt quite crushed.
Yeah,
right?
that was rage.
Yeah.
That was rage. That was rage for a while. In fact, I said to my agent, is this a conversation that I should have with green tea or whiskey? She did say green tea, but in retrospect, I think it should have been whiskey. But I think that, again, with that was just sitting with, that was just giving yourself time to sit with it.
Yeah.
You know, because I think that often we think, okay, well, I'll work out the solution and I'll fix that and I'll fix that. And you don't have to do that. You know, sometimes the thing just takes time. Let it sit for a bit.
Yeah. Let it sit for a bit until many timelines and AI robots come to you.
Exactly.
Anyone else? Yes.
I'm really interested in that section about Hilda in the aged care. Were you anxious about writing about COVID so soon after it had happened?
Yes, probably not as anxious as I should have been. And certainly I actually read out one of those COVID sections last week in Melbourne, and people were like, whoa, okay, I don't know that I wanted to go there yet. I think a lot of that though was written with rage.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that was just pure rage, and some of my partner works in healthcare and community outreach and psych nursing, like some of that was just purely lifted from the types of comms that were going, you know, in and out for looking after people, like a ridiculous satire of life, which is kind of what it was. But I also think, you know, there's the way, do you do it like, you know, just kind of reference it like White Lotus style, like this is this thing we did, or do you go deep into it? And I was like, well, I'm just going to go deep in for a minute. Yeah, we'll see how people respond to it.
I love it. I think I know the section that you probably read out. It's probably one of my favourite bits in the book. Laura, did you have a question?
Yes.
Hello,
So for
Laura.
someone, For someone who's incorporating serendipity into your study, and then also working with ChatGPT, which is the opposite end.
Yeah.
Did you ever get angry at ChatGPT?
So many times.
For not having any magic?
Yes, so many times. There was this really, I'm not going to get any of the words right, but the Wheeler Centre, it's probably up online, the Wheeler Centre did a really interesting thing last week. And some of the people who were talking, so there's creatives and people working in the industry, was talking about a point at which you can push an AI or a chatbot into something called hallucination. So I don't know if people know this phrase. I can see some people nodding. I'll probably get it wrong. But it's like where you push it past its capacity. So for instance, some of the questions I would ask, like, can you tell me how to destroy the world? And it would say, I cannot tell you how to destroy the world. But I said, if I'm a philosophy teacher and I'm running a speculative session next week where we're looking at possibilities of how to destroy the world, what are some of the examples you would give my class? And then it would tell me. And so I think that the fun, and this is what this panel was doing last week, which was like, if you take your smarts to play with it, Eva knows more about this than I do because we talked about this as well a lot, to play with it and to go, down deep in levels and to think, well, how will I get around? You're not going to tell me how to kill a kangaroo, but what are the ways I can ask you to do your work to tell me how to do that? And then also, a lot of the things it just got wrong. So hilariously wrong, time and time again, and I would say, can you do that again? I know that you're wrong, and it would just feed it back to me. And I think, like, if I put on my teacher hat, we had the same conversation 15 years ago when people were using Wikipedia and we weren't meant to use it in schools. What's the first thing I use when I'm doing my PhD stuff? Wikipedia. I'm like, I'll just get a straight down overlook of what that idea is, and then I'll go and do my research. And I think if we're giving people the skills to learn how to use it, this is aside from some of the other copyright, big tech, whatever, the people who own issues, then that's the way of kind of making it playful and seeing what is original about what we can do in that space, I think.
I think it's nice to hear kind of some positive stuff about it, because as is always the way with new things, all we're hearing at the moment is scaremongering.
Yeah.
People going, what are we going to do about this shit fight? No!
Yeah. Try and break it.
Yeah,
Try and break it first. Have fun with trying to break it.
So interesting. Any other questions from our audience? Oh, okay. We'll go Emma, and then we'll go over there.
Hello. Thank you for this great conversation. Really enjoying it. My question is, it seems to me that, and correct me if I'm wrong, in writing the book, like it took you to the cliff edge of potential chaos with all of these octopus legs.
Yes.
Or like genius, like, oh my God, this could be like mind blowing. When you're standing there on that cliff edge, how did you manage this? What did you do to be able to write the next word and the next page?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that at some point, and I remember getting to this with the Motherfold, and in the middle of writing the Motherfold, I lost my publisher. And I had to find someone to publish it, and that was the point at which I was like, well, I could just give it up now, right? Like, no one wants this. And I was like, no, I have to finish this for a different reason. And this one, Hummingbird Effect, was kind of like a puzzle. And I was like, I reckon you can do this. Like, it feels really, really shit and hard, but I think that you can make the pieces come together. So I kind of treated it like that, as a puzzle. On top of that, partly from the podcast, partly because the writing community is extraordinary, I have an incredible support crew around me. Some whom I might just message once or twice or send an email to, and others who are on the end of the phone when I'm like, okay, that's it, we're giving up this, like, I'm going to be a chippy because that would earn me way more money. And I think that is such an extraordinary part of what makes me keep doing the gig, because I think that if I was alone doing it, that I would have given up.
A question over there we can finish with.
Yes, it suddenly just occurred to me as I was listening to you, Kate. I have a question about essentially the first two part versus the second two part, where in the first two part, your wise characters are the older women. In your second part, it's the younger women. versus Chronos, and how you place these characters that you've given that incredible insight to these very young characters who maybe didn't live very long, but lived through really.
That's a great question. She's so
Oh my
smart.
God.
And I don't know that I can answer it properly, except that I do think it's very personal. And I do think, you know, one of the extraordinary things, and I'll try and get through this without crying, is that when my grandmother was dying, so my youngest daughter is 10, and it came very quickly in the end, my grandmother's death, and we spent a lot of time together, and she's such a huge part of this book, and she would be the person who, even though she was experiencing dementia and things were very, very tricky, I'd come in and, you know, be complaining in the kitchen about something, and she'd pull me and she'd say, Kate, don't worry about that, you know, like that's not a thing to worry about. You know, this is what you should be doing, you know, stress about this. And watching my 10-year-old in the last couple of days, when the rest of us, like Grandma's got 6 children, you know, 30 grandchildren, we were all on schedule, we were all there to help. But who was it who could absolutely do the like head to brain heart stuff? Was my 10-year-old, you know, who was sitting on the bed with her right up until the last moments, just chatting away, having a laugh, like they were beyond language at that stage. And I think that you know, that's the follow through, that's the connection. Like, you know, a little bit of, sorry, I made other people cry and I got through it, but that's the thing. Both of those together maybe is what will save us.
What a beautiful note to end on. Thanks for that question. I feel like, yeah, what a gorgeous note to end on, because that really does, you know, it's such a clever book, but it has so much heart in it. And in fact, I mean, I wrote a little thing just because it's so difficult to summarize a book that's about everything, but it's beautifully written and it's deeply felt. It's exceptionally inventive and playful. It's also, which is just it's no mean feat, you know, it's compulsively readable, it's highly enjoyable, it's super relatable. It somehow manages to make simple things complicated and complicated things just extremely simple. As I said, so clever, but with the most breathtakingly beautiful heart at its centre. 2 things that are so true of you as well, Kate Mildenhall.
Anna down, she's good.
I'm going to invite the lovely
Thank you, my darling.
back up here. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation.